camera is now on.
Okay.
So again, thank you very much, Dr. Henderson, for agreeing to be part of this oral history interview. Today is the 21st of February 2014. We are interviewing Dr. Conway Henderson about his career as a political science professor at USC Upstate. So I guess we could start, Dr. Henderson. During what years were you on the faculty at USC Upstate?
I came here in 1971, brand new minted PhD, and I taught here till 2005. I stopped at Christmas time. I'm not exactly sure why. Part of it was health, but it just seemed like a good time. I put in 35 years, kind of like the mailman that just right in the middle of his delivery mail one day said, "All right, that's enough." He went back and gave him their pouch.
Now, was this the first institution at which you taught?
Not exactly. I taught at a junior college in Maryland while I was writing my dissertation, but that was a part-time job. But this was the only full-time job I had.
Yeah. How did you learn about it?
It was through my university. I went to the University of Iowa, and they would receive notices about positions. And in those days, of course, you wouldn't be on a computer bulletin board or anything like that. It'd come in the mail, and somebody from the office would call you and say, "There's a letter or a packet here describing a job. Do you want to come and pick it up? And do you want to sign a statement that your credentials can be mailed in?" And so all of that happened, and I actually had a job already in hand. I was living in West Virginia, and I had about ready to sign a contract with a very small school over in the middle of West Virginia in the coal mining country. And the only thing I could find out about that college was by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and it was a flood report. And the lady I was married to is from the coast of Virginia, and she's going to have to be hogtied if I went there. So this opening became available. It was a very tight year for jobs then, and that happens periodically in almost every field. And I was delighted to get this job. I was laying on bed, relaxing, getting ready to work on my dissertation. Actually, I was going to go back to sleep. My wife had gone to work. But the dean of the college called me and wanted me to come down, and I agreed to do it. And at that time, it was the administration building and a flagpole. That was the school, and about 350 students. And I was walking away from a job in West Virginia that had been a long-term established four-year college, and this was a two-year school. And they even had housing to rent to faculty and a place to even keep my horse if I wanted to put it there. But I was so afraid of that wife, I thought I'd better move, and I don't regret it. I've liked it here very much.
Now, so did you teach in what is now the administration building?
I did. My first office was there for two years, I believe, and I taught there. All my classes were there. And then we moved down. They bought or leased motels around the Peach Blossom restaurant, and some of those rooms were converted to classrooms, and some of them were converted to offices. And I was there for a couple of years. And then I was up in the Hodge Center for a year or so. And then in 1976, they finished the library, and the top floor was offices, and I was put in office 214, and I stayed there till I retired. If I'd have come over to this building, I would have had the seniority where I could have at last had an office with a window. I always lived for that, but I'd had to keep on teaching, you see. So I let it go. I just accepted my fate. The offices were different sizes in the library, and I didn't know people were over there picking out their office. I thought they'd just do it by seniority or good looks, and I knew I'd come out way up front. And I get over there, and I'm in this 7-foot by 14-foot cubicle, and that was my home for many years. And I really dreaded to move out. It was like a little cocoon, and I had so many friends around me and great students coming through, and it just I kept telling them they ought to at least put a plaque on the door about how long I was there and how great I was, but they didn't.
Now, were the classrooms in the library building at the time?
They were, and stayed there. I don't know if there are any classrooms on the second floor now or not, but, even after the department moved to this building, they were still going over and teaching there some. But yes, the classrooms were there, but I've taught, in just about every building. I'd still go over and teach administration sometimes. I'd come over to this building. I taught international law in one of the semicircular classrooms upstairs. And I taught in the Hodge Center. I taught American government twice in the second floor of the Hodge Center. And I didn't mind that, I really didn't, because when you're stuck in a floor in a building without windows, just almost any good excuse, you know, instead of putting a form in the mail, sometimes you walk it over to the administration office just to get a breath of fresh air. I don't think that building upstairs, it was really designed to be part of the library stacks. And I don't think they ever really came up with the design for air conditioning and heat that allowed that second floor to be a completely healthy area, but that's just my opinion.
Was this part of the library building? There's a photograph of you in the top right-hand corner.
That looks like it was in, I'm thinking that particular picture was in the motel. This one I think was in the administration building. I'm not sure about this one. I don't see enough evidence to be able to determine. But that looks like Dr. Lehman there. He's still teaching part-time. I really, Dick Spong, Vern Knoll here. I really can't be absolutely certain, but I think that was probably in the motel. It looks like the heat system they have in motels right along the wall. And that used to, you run into some really strange things. You have, if you have a motel room converted to a classroom, you have people getting up and going to the bathroom, flushing the commode, and it just, then you have to wait for all the snickering to stop. And it was very much a pioneering enterprise in those days, very much so.
I heard that there's some faculty members lived, or at least spent the night there.
Yeah, a couple of them did. One taught political science, Jim Sloan. He was from Clinton, South Carolina, and he would get his classes bunched up in the middle of the week or the end of the week, and he would stay 1 or 2 nights in his office. Not unlike some congressmen do in Washington, D.C., so they can afford to keep their wife and kids in a home back in their constituency. But he did, and Dr. Alice Henderson's got a good story. She was sharing an office with someone else, I believe it was on the first floor of the motel, and she had her name and phone number and her schedule, like for office hours and so forth. And so one night a man calls her looking for a lady of the evening, so to speak. And she had to explain that wasn't really her line of work. But at that time, we actually had our own swimming pool. I mean, the motel let us use the swimming pool. It's pretty nice. You had to have a sense of humor to work here, partly because of the salary, but mostly because
Well, speaking of, I guess, what were the students like, especially in the early 1970s?
They were pretty good. What I liked about them, and many of you would be in this situation too, they're working, they're trying to have a social life, and they want to go to college. Now, some of them, and everybody that's ever taught will say the same thing I'm going to teach. You always wish your students were better prepared in certain ways. And yet, the earnestness made up for it. The only criticism I would have, and I blame the administration for it, for several years, as we were trying to move from a 2-year to a 3-year to a 4-year school, the administration was taking people that did not have, this is again my opinion, and I don't care who hears it, but everybody's always welcome to my opinion. But we were recruiting students who, in my opinion, never really had a fair chance to go through college. And in those days, I called our school the Roach Motel of higher education. You can get in, but you can't get out. And you just had to sort of call the good and bad people. But I would say, just as a very rough estimate, 25% of the people we were allowing to come in and sign up and pay tuition, they should have been screened out, either at the high school level, and you can't always tell by high school records how good people are. You just can't. There's too much social promotion. But it was just kind of a sad time in that sense. But I always had people who were bright, and you have to, one of the things I took pride in about teaching, I tried to teach to the middle of my class. It's always tempting to teach to the 5 or 6 or 7 that are smarter than you are, and you know they are. They're just born to be smart, talented people, and you want to teach to them. And they're usually the more curious and interested people. But you have to teach to the middle and hope everybody else can fit in. The weaker ones can keep up, and the really fast ones won't get too bored. And I think teachers sometimes have to make little compromises like that. You don't have much of a choice. Fortunately, it's not like, in the Army cavalry, they used to say a troop of cavalry can only move as fast as the slowest horse. But in a college classroom, you're hoping everybody will do well and pass and be reasonably happy. The only really unhappy students I had were people who would go into high school and make some really easy grades. And they come to college, and I think most college students have this experience. I did. And you run into college classrooms where the performance level is different. And you're not making those grades with the same amount of study time. And some people catch on and they buckle down and really work hard, and others let it become an ego issue. I was physically threatened several times because I wouldn't give higher grades. One fellow, he actually was making a B. He was a fairly decent B student, but he just wasn't an A student. And his ego couldn't stand it. And he threatened to bring his shotgun to school the next day. I said, bring it on. And by the time I saw him, he was leaving here in handcuffs with 2 sheriff deputies. I think he'd been arrested for, I remember his name, but I won't say it. I think he'd been arrested for shoplifting. But most of the people I had in my classroom were pretty decent, civilized people, and whether they were happy with the grade or not, I think they understood I was just doing my job. But you do occasionally have someone who's, and of course in any general population, there's going to be a certain number of people who are going to be very eccentric or even mentally ill. And some of those folks go to college, and some of those folks become teachers.
You were here during a very interesting transitional period where, the USC Spartanburg was a 2-year college.
Yes.
And then it evolved into 4 years.
Right.
But at some point, you would have had to have had students who were 3rd year with no guarantee that the school would be 4 years. So what was the motivation for those students to take classes?
Well, we were seen at the time when we were a 2-year school, we were basically seen as a feeder school for 4-year schools. And the standard argument was come here and go to school much more cheaply and get a lot more help and get yourself ready and then move on to Clemson or the University of South Carolina. And the big thing was you can go to this school and work, and we were not providing any housing at all. And that was just understood to be the tremendous appeal of our school. And we were a 2-year school from 68 up through 1972. And then in 73, we advertised ourselves 773. And this was the push, you see, to pull in some folks that, in my opinion, it wasn't kind to them. It wasn't kind to them. And then 4 years and 74, which meant we had to have 1,000 students. And we did it. But no, several years we went from 350 to 1,000 students. And to this day, I don't entirely approve the way we did it, but I wasn't in charge of that. But it was just a situation where to really do well for our students and to maximize our service to the community, we really needed to be 4-year school. But there there was no guarantee that we'd make it. It was all about recruitment, and they, you know, you'd be encouraged, you'd be criticized if your grades were too tough, you see. If you gave what you thought was a fair grade. And of course, there were hopes that as our identity in this community would grow, we'd have a lot more people coming in. That's exactly what's happened. But I can remember for several years, people referred to us in the local lexicon as the branch. The branch of the University of South Carolina, the branch. And we were identified and people told where we were because we were right across 176 from the Ramada Inn. You know, the branch across from the Ramada. And that was our landmark. And eventually we became their landmark, and they're now torn down, and we're still going strong. But we have very little identification starting out. And of course, as many of you know, the school really began in the basement of the nursing dormitory down by the hospital. It was down there a couple of years. And then they moved into the administration building, and that's when I came in. But it was just a kind of a rough growth stage that we had to go through and build up our identity. And I think it's safe to say now we're very well established, and in spite of the decrease in state support and increase in tuition, I still think it's overall a pretty good buy.
Now, in the early 1970s, when you arrived, the Vietnam War was still
Right.
going on. We oftentimes
Right.
associate the war, especially the latter years of the Vietnam War, with protests on campus.
Yes.
Did you see any evidence of that here?
No, it was such a commuter campus that when people come to school now, they talk about it. They talk about issues about the Vietnam War. And I would have guys in my classroom that 6 months before had been in a firefight in Vietnam. So we could have some pretty good, interesting discussions. In fact, one of the students that threatened me one time is a guy that spent 12 years in the Army. He was 6'4", 280 pounds. He'd been several years in the Green Berets. So he was one I wasn't going to say bring your shotgun the next day. But we finally got used to each other and got along. But yeah, we had some very good discussions, and there were people for the war. I had a student get mad at me because I was saying some critical things about it. I said what I thought was positive, what I thought was critical, and it just blew his mind away. I mean, if you weren't totally diehard patriotic and for the war, then kind of a John Wayne approach, then this is wrong. I saw a lot more anti-war activity in the 60s when I was in graduate school. Attended a kind of a soapbox speech area in the middle of the campus, and there's a huge crowd there, and on one side were some fascist students, on the other side communist students, and they were throwing eggs at each other. And I decided I wasn't really that interested in the program and left. But I don't think it was a real hot button issue on this campus, but a lot of that did have to do with the fact that people were going to school and then going to work or going home. And they weren't in fraternities, they weren't very student organizations, there wasn't any student housing. They were just getting on with their lives. But it was controversial in the classroom sometimes, and I wanted it to be. I wanted people to think about it. And the same thing with other wars, like the first Iraq War in 1991, and then the one in 2003, and I refer to it as a military intervention, and the student immediately corrected me and said, no, it's a liberation. Well, that was his opinion. We liberated the Iraqis, and they're doing just like they did when we went in. I was right as usual.
Now, I guess as far as student activity, this was another of my questions. I guess I'll have to ask it. But during the early to mid 70s, there was a streaking craze on American college campuses.
Yes.
Did any of that take place here?
I didn't see it on this campus, but I was renting an apartment. It was in Converse Heights in the mid 70s. And there was about 100 people. How they didn't get killed, I don't know, because that driveway by my building comes to a kind of a little bluff, cement block wall, and in the darkness. And I think it was Wofford students and Converse students just running wild and then running down this alleyway between the houses and.
So running naked through Conway sites?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes. I'm not sure what possessed them, but I guess they were just having fun.
How did students change over your career? 'Cause this early 70s, by the 1980s, had the general average student change?
I feel like, in terms of quality, I think they began to improve after we became a four-year school. I think they got better. I think we were able to be more selective. But I haven't seen a tremendous amount of change, and here's why. I mean, in terms of the character, the attitude. And the reason is, I think all the years that we've been in existence, we appeal to the kind of folks who are looking to get ahead in the world. They're not going to college because their dad and mother went to college. Many of the people we have, their parents didn't go to college. They're not heritage students oftentimes. Now, I have taught people here, and I taught their parents before. I was around that long. But, and they're not coming here necessarily for the fraternity life or anything. They're coming here because they want a future. And it's always been like that. They want to advance their lives. Now, many of you, and the school's good enough now to where I think we attract you because of intellectual ability. You want to study, you want to learn. That's the best reason of all to go to college. But I think we have always appealed to the kind of young folks who want to get out with a good degree and get a good job. And while they're here, they're glad to have the intellectual stimulus. They appreciate it. They appreciate the teachers overall. Most people do. And I hope they always move on to a real good life because they came here. But I haven't seen radically different students, like a movement from the hippies to a pro-war group, from a pro-war group to all business majors with button-down collars and close haircuts and that sort of thing. I haven't seen the social environment change so much because I think you're the kind of people I was. My parents didn't go to college. I went to college because I wanted a future, and I worked hard. And I think I saw a lot of that while I was here for 35 years.
One big thing that did change among students, the drinking age. How did that? Because you look at some of the annuals, you see that students are allowed to go to the Hodge Center and have keg parties.
Yeah.
Did that bring about any change? I guess in 1980s, I believe, when they.
Yeah. I don't think they invited me to those parties. I really, to be honest with you, I didn't notice that. I was an advisor to a fraternity for a while, but I don't remember them ever being wild or drunk, crazy drunk or anything like that at all. And student advisor, student government one year, but it no doubt must have affected some young people, but I just didn't see that. If there was an influence of it on campus, I didn't see it.
What fraternity, if you wouldn't mind naming names?
Pi, wait a minute. What's the one, Pi Kappa? No, Pi Kappa Theta? Pi. What? Yeah, it could be, I believe so, yeah. It's been a while.
How about student organizations?
Was I a part of them?
Yes, correct.
Oh, yeah, I led a group in human rights organization, Amnesty International, for years. We did a lot of letter writing to try and get political prisoners freed. And I was advisor to a political science club, also an international relations club, and there are probably a couple others back there. But the main thing I was interested in was human rights, and I kept that going for years. And then Richard Combs teaches philosophy. He kind of took it over even before I retired, and we had a good strong program for a long time.
Did you keep up with any of the sports teams?
I kept up with, I didn't really go to the games. It just seemed like I was always grading blue books, to be honest with you. I was just telling somebody a while ago, I really miss interacting with the faculty and students, but I don't miss grading those blue books. I don't know how many weekends I ruined sitting with a stack of those things in front of me. And I used to read about the sports, and I still do. You know, the girls softball team, the men's baseball, and their basketball, and all seem to be doing rather well. But I didn't go. I like basketball especially. I used to go to some basketball games, but I've never been a huge sports enthusiast like most people are. I sometimes wish I were. I like football pretty well. Maybe if they start a football team, I'll come to that.
Oh, in the Hodge Center, because a lot of the basketball games were held in the Hodge Center.
Right.
You arrived here before the Hodge Center. Where did they do basketball? Because I know they had a team.
Yeah, they did. I think they borrowed one. Joe Bowman could tell us if he was here. He was the coach for the basketball team. He's a retired professor in education. I think they borrowed a high school gym, if I recall correctly. And we just had to make do. And even after we had the Hodge Center, they had some kind of special reception going on, and faculty were volunteering, and there was the coach and his wife, and we were all making sandwiches, getting ready for something up in the second floor of the Hodge Center. And we did a little of everything. The books, when they moved into the library, were lines of faculty carrying them in, as well as students. It was just, you just picked up and did what had to be done. It was kind of like a little frontier settlement where everybody had to do everything.
And the library was in the administration building?
It was. It's, I'm not sure I can tell you, they restructured the walls so much. But I remember in the very early 70s, it was a library with 18,000 volumes in it, no computers. And for many years, there were either 3 or 4 tabletop computer stations in the entire library building. And that was in the days of the coaxial cable. And then when they went to optic fibers, they just exploded in computers everywhere. And I remember when I was given in my office a 286, the Pentium 286, and I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. I didn't even go out on the internet with a telephone, push it down in the, I think I'm next.
I'm going to shift gears here. We're going to have to wrap this up pretty quickly, but I did want to ask you, especially since you're a political scientist, a lot of really interesting politicians came to speak at USC Spartanburg while you were here. Henry Kissinger, George Wallace, I'm trying to think of the George H.W. Bush.
Yes.
As a political scientist, did you have an opportunity to interact with them when they came to visit? I
really didn't. I attended the talks of all of them. The only one I didn't was Henry Kissinger, and I was in the hospital for surgery that year. I would love to have heard him talk though, because he's so close to my own field. I did read in the paper though. He said that he had been trained at Camp Crawford. He's in the Army in World War II. And he said he didn't have any idea red clay could be so hard to dig in. But the one that was most interesting to me was George Wallace. And I'd read all these things about him and in race relations and so forth. I felt sorry for him, first of all, because he'd been shot close range with a .30 pistol about 6 or 7 times. No, how many did they hold? 6. And was crippled. He had to be stood up like FDR at the lectern and fastened to it. And he gave a wonderful talk. And what really, really, really caught my attention was how much I liked the man. Whatever his views were, he was just so likable. Of course, a politician wants to be likable. But it was just such a contrast to what I expected. I expected a man full of bitterness or vitriol or just sort of mad at the world. But he was nothing like that at all. He's the kind of guy you want to sit down and eat lunch with.
They stood him up behind the lectern?
Yeah, fastened him up.
He didn't speak from his wheelchair?
No, I don't really think so. I think he was, Ron Romine would know, that was his program, but I think he was, if I recall correctly, he was fastened into place, some kind of harness rig. But I may have misremembered, but I don't think I did. But that was a horrible thing that happened to him.
Okay, well, one other question I want to make certain that I ask, because according to Amazon.com, you authored 2 textbooks.
Yes.
And wanted to ask you, did you ever use those textbooks in your own classes?
I did the first one. I used it a couple of times. I sort of alternate and use others too.
And I was also going to ask, how did your experiences in the classroom here at USC Spartanburg shaped the trajectory of those textbooks, or did it?
It did, definitely. I wrote the textbook. I think the smart people write a textbook for the professors. And so you tend to make them more difficult if you're thinking that way. I tried to write them in very readable English, and also the theoretical setting at what I thought was about right for juniors and seniors in a medium to very good university. And I think I succeeded. The books were modestly successful, not great winners. I think if I'd written them harder, I would have, assuming I could, I think they would have probably, of course it's the professors you see that pick the books out. And like on the international law book, if I really wanted to appeal to them, the book's about half politics and about half law. And if I really wanted to appeal to them, I would have just strung out all sorts of citations of cases, and that the people that go into that field, they usually like that. They like a real crunchy, a case. It's like a fruit cake. I want it crunchy.
Okay, well, do you have any additional memories of USC Spartanburg that you would like to preserve for posterity?
Oh, goodness, that's a wonderful question. I wish I had a wonderful answer. I guess what really, really stands out in my mind is just the splendid friendships over the years, because there's some of the people that I've known here, especially ones I taught with for 40-some years. And I still meet people every now and then that were in my classes. I had a young lady call me 2 or 3 weeks ago and wanted to have lunch, and she was in my very last senior seminar. And it just tickled me to death that she's still interested in me. I've been retired, 7 or 8 years. And it just really pleased me that she's still interested in what I was doing. And so I guess it's just the memories of people, and just what a wonderful opportunity an education is, and not that it's just practical and useful for you, but it's very enjoyable. One of the most interesting and enjoyable things you can ever do is learn. And education is the only thing I can't take away from you. I've been divorced twice, and my degrees in education is the only thing they couldn't get.
Well, with that, I would like to open up the floor for questions that anyone else might have. This is not normal procedure for an interview, but I thought we'd take the opportunity since we have the time. All right, well, if not, we'll conclude the interview
All right, thank
here.
you.
Thank you very much for your time.